It was one of those mornings when the whole city seemed to move faster than usual. Cars honked outside, people hurried along the streets, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air near the Willow Cafe, a small but elegant place hidden between tall office buildings. Inside, the cafe buzzed with soft chatter and the clinking of cups. The morning rush had already begun. Emily stood behind the counter trying to steady her breathing. It was her third day at work, and though she had gone through training, nothing truly prepared her for the real pace of the cafe. She was young, only 23, and this was her first job in a city she'd only moved to 2 weeks ago. Everything felt new. The noise, the people, the routine. But she wanted this. She needed to prove to herself that she could handle it. Her black apron was neatly tied, her hair pulled back into a tidy bun. She had spent an extra 5 minutes that morning ironing her uniform because she believed small things mattered. Her mother had always said, "People notice how you show up, not what you say." So Emily showed up early, nervous but determined. The cafe had a comforting atmosphere, light wooden furniture, golden lamps that hung low over the tables, and a soft playlist of piano tunes in the background. Businessmen in suits sat in groups, tapping on laptops or discussing numbers over coffee. A couple of students in hoodies whispered about their assignments. And the aroma, that rich mix of espresso, vanilla, and baked pastries, made the air feel warm and alive. Emily looked at the clock. 8:32 a.m. She still had almost 4 hours until her lunch break. She took a deep breath and started checking the tables near the window. Clean plates, folded napkins, glasses filled with water. Everything had to be perfect. Her manager, Lisa, was a woman in her 40s who ran the place like a captain steering a ship through stormy seas. Lisa was strict but fair. "Remember," she had told Emily that morning, "people don't just come here for coffee. They come for comfort. Our job is to make them feel seen, respected, and taken care of. But if anyone breaks the rules, even a customer, you stay calm and firm." "Got it." Emily had nodded seriously. She was new, but she wanted to do everything right. As the doorbell chimed again, a wave of cold air entered with a small group of regulars. Emily smiled politely and guided them to their seats. Her hands shook slightly as she handed out menus, but she masked it well. Every time she smiled, she felt a little braver. She loved watching people. Each table told its own story. A man reading the newspaper as if nothing else existed. 2 friends laughing over an inside joke. A woman staring at her phone waiting for a message that probably wouldn't come. Emily noticed these little things. She liked to imagine what their lives were like, what brought them here today. In the middle of all the rush, she almost didn't notice when an older man walked in. He wasn't like the others, no suit, no briefcase, no rush. Just a plain gray jacket, a white shirt slightly creased, and simple jeans. He moved slowly, his steps quiet, his expression calm. He looked around for a moment, as if searching for someone, then chose a table near the large window. Emily glanced at him briefly. He didn't order anything right away, just sat down, pulled out a tablet, and started reading something. Maybe he was waiting for someone, she thought, or maybe he just wanted some quiet. The morning continued. Orders came and went. Cappuccinos, pancakes, scrambled eggs, endless refills of coffee. Emily tried to keep up. Once, she almost dropped a tray but caught it just in time. Another waiter winked at her in amusement, and she laughed nervously. It was a tough job, but she liked it. The rhythm of it, the sense of purpose. Every now and then, her eyes wandered back to the man in the corner. He hadn't ordered anything except a glass of water, and he seemed completely absorbed in his tablet. Sometimes he'd pause and look outside at the street, watching the world go by. There was something peaceful about him, or maybe lonely. Emily couldn't tell. Still, part of her training echoed in her mind. Customers must order within 15 minutes if the cafe is busy. Reserved tables must be cleared if needed. Rules were rules. She didn't question them. As the minutes passed, more people started arriving. A large group in suits who had reserved seats for a business breakfast. The place was filling up quickly. Lisa gave Emily a quick signal from behind the counter, that subtle nod that meant get the reserved table ready. Emily's heart raced a little. She looked at the reserved area and froze. The man in the gray jacket was sitting right there, at one of the reserved tables. Maybe he didn't notice the reserved sign that had fallen over. Or maybe he thought it didn't matter. She hesitated. Part of her didn't want to disturb him. He looked so calm, so harmless. But she also remembered Lisa's words, "Even if it's uncomfortable, do your job right." So, with a nervous breath, Emily straightened her uniform and walked toward him. She practiced her line in her head, polite but firm. Not rude, not too soft either. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the tray she was holding. When she reached his table, he looked up. His eyes were kind but sharp, like someone who had seen a lot in life. Emily forced a smile. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly, "but this table is actually reserved. Would you mind moving to another one?" For a second, there was silence. The man blinked, then smiled faintly. Not offended, not surprised, just calm. "Of course," he said. "I understand." He stood up slowly, gathered his tablet and jacket, and moved to another empty table by the far wall. No anger, no complaint, just quiet acceptance. Emily felt relieved but also guilty. She hoped she hadn't ruined his morning. But she told herself she had done the right thing. The cafe had rules for a reason and she followed them. As she wiped the now empty table and prepared it for the arriving guests, she had no idea that the man she had just asked to move, so politely, so innocently, was not just another customer. He was Daniel Mercer, the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the city. And in less than an hour, that very table would become the setting for a $200 million decision that would change everything. But for now, Emily just smiled at the next customer and continued serving coffee, unaware that her simple act of honesty had just set an incredible story in motion. The man who had quietly moved to the corner table opened his tablet again and began reading. The morning light from the big window fell across his face, making the lines around his eyes softer. His hair was silver, neatly combed back, and though his clothes were plain, there was something calm and confident about him. The kind of quiet that comes from people who don't need to prove anything to anyone. His name was Daniel Mercer, but no one in the cafe knew that. To most people, he looked like just another middle-aged customer having a slow morning. In reality, he was the CEO of Mercer Tech, one of the most respected technology companies in the country. Today was supposed to be an important day, the final meeting before he approved a massive $200 million deal that had been months in the making. But Daniel didn't want to meet in an office or a fancy hotel. He had chosen this cafe for a reason. It was neutral, simple, and quiet. A place where people could talk honestly without the weight of conference rooms and polished suits. He believed that you could tell a lot about a person by how they behaved in ordinary places. As he sat there sipping his water, he smiled faintly at the irony. The waitress had just told him to leave a reserved table. He wasn't offended. In fact, he respected it. He had been in her position once. Young, nervous, trying to do everything right. Rules mattered when you were trying to make your way in the world. He remembered being 20 years old, working in a small electronics store, trying to convince customers to buy computers when he barely knew how to fix one himself. People had spoken down to him then, told him he wasn't smart enough, not polished enough, but he had learned to listen, to work harder, to stay patient. Those early years had taught him the value of humility. Maybe that's why, even now, he dressed simply and avoided showing off his wealth. A young waiter brought him a refill of water, but Daniel waved it off politely and said, "Thank you, I'm fine." His voice was calm, deep, and kind. He liked observing people more than talking. From his corner, he watched the cafe, the waiters running around, the laughter from a group of office workers, the hiss of milk steamers behind the counter. It all reminded him of the energy that kept the world moving, ordinary people doing their jobs with quiet effort. Meanwhile, Emily kept glancing toward him from behind the counter. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She hoped he wasn't upset. She told herself again that she'd only followed the rules. Still, something about the man made her curious. He didn't seem angry or irritated. Instead, he looked completely at peace, as if being told to move was the least of his worries. At one point, their eyes met, and she gave him a small, nervous smile. To her surprise, he smiled back. A real smile, gentle and reassuring. For some reason, that made her feel lighter. Daniel turned his focus back to the tablet. He was reviewing the final proposal for the acquisition, a smaller company that specialized in renewable energy software. It wasn't just a business move for him. It was personal. He wanted Mercertech to invest in a cleaner future, something that would outlast him. But he also needed to make sure he could trust the people behind the project. Trust mattered more than numbers to him. He had arranged to meet his executive team here in less than an hour. It wasn't the first time he'd made a big decision in a small place. He liked to test his team's character, to see how they treated waiters, how they handled small discomforts. You could learn more about someone's values over a cup of coffee than in a boardroom full of charts. A soft breeze entered through the open door as more customers came in. The cafe grew louder, but Daniel didn't mind. He noticed how every worker seemed to know their place. One took orders, one cleaned tables, one handled payments. Everyone was moving, working together like gears in a machine. And in the middle of all that, Emily, the young waitress who had just told him to move, stood out. She moved quickly, but she wasn't mechanical. She smiled when talking to customers, picked up a fallen napkin without hesitation, and apologized even when something wasn't her fault. Daniel admired that kind of sincerity. He had seen too many people lose it on their way to success. While waiting, he decided to order something simple. When Emily came near, he raised his hand slightly. "Excuse me," he said. She turned, instantly alert. "Yes, sir? I think I'll have a black coffee, please. No sugar." "Of course," she said with relief. "Right away." As she walked to the counter, she silently thanked him for not being cold or rude. Most customers who were asked to move tables complained or left bad reviews. But this man had been kind. She didn't know who he was, but she felt he wasn't ordinary. Lisa, the manager, was busy preparing for the large business group expected soon. She called out to Emily, "Make sure table 5 is spotless. The clients coming today are important. Very important." Emily nodded, not realizing the irony. The man who'd just ordered a coffee was the most important client of them all. As Daniel waited, he opened an email on his tablet. His assistant had written, "Everything's ready for the meeting, sir. The documents are printed, and the legal team will join after your approval." He typed a short reply, "Good. Let's meet at the Willow Cafe. It's the right place to end this deal." When Emily brought his coffee, he thanked her again with that same kind smile. She noticed his hands. Steady, well-kept, but with small scars, the kind you get from years of hard work before success. The cafe clock ticked softly toward 9. Outside, the morning sunlight brightened, reflecting off car windows and glass buildings. Inside, Daniel took his first sip of coffee and smiled to himself. He had made hundreds of business deals in his life, but something about today felt different. He didn't know yet that a simple act of honesty, from a nervous young waitress, would remind him of the very values that had built his empire. For now, he simply enjoyed his coffee, waiting quietly for the meeting that would soon decide the future of a $200 million deal. And Emily, unaware of who he really was, continued to move between tables, working hard, trying her best, and unknowingly becoming part of a story that people would talk about for years to come. The cafe was now busier than ever. The sound of coffee machines mixed with the chatter of voices and the scraping of chairs. Plates clattered, cups clinked, and the smell of freshly baked croissants floated through the air. Emily moved quickly from one table to another, taking orders and clearing dishes, trying to keep everything running smoothly. She could feel the rush, that tense rhythm of a full morning shift, but she had learned to hide her nervousness behind a polite smile. Lisa, the manager, was walking back and forth with a clipboard in her hand, her sharp eyes scanning every corner of the cafe. The large group they had been expecting, the important clients, would arrive any minute now. Lisa wanted everything perfect. No mistakes, no confusion. "Emily," she called, "make sure the reserved section is ready. Every glass, every napkin, spotless." "Yes, ma'am," Emily replied quickly. She hurried toward the back tables, the ones by the window, the same area where she had earlier asked the quiet man in the gray jacket to move. The reserved sign had fallen again, so she picked it up and placed it properly in the center of the table. She arranged the plates neatly, refilled the water glasses, and straightened the chairs until they all lined up perfectly. As she was adjusting the cutlery, she glanced over to the corner where the man now sat. He was still there, calmly drinking his coffee, scrolling through something on his tablet. He looked peaceful, almost as if the noise around him didn't exist. Emily felt a small wave of guilt again. Maybe she had been too quick to ask him to move earlier. But then she reminded herself that she had only been following the rules. Just then, the doorbell chimed again, and a group of men in suits walked in. They looked important, confident, polished, and clearly used to being treated with attention. One of them, a tall man with silver cufflinks, approached the counter. "We have a reservation," he said. "Under Mercer." Lisa's expression immediately changed. She smiled professionally and said, "Of course, sir. Your table is ready." Emily froze. Mercer. She didn't realize it yet, but that name was about to change everything. As Lisa led the group toward the reserved section, Emily stood aside, watching them settle down. They seemed like business executives. One man opened a laptop, another pulled out folders, and a third started taking notes. The atmosphere at their table felt serious, almost like a meeting before a big decision. Then Lisa walked over to the man in the corner, the same man Emily had spoken to earlier. She bent slightly, her voice suddenly softer and more respectful. "Mr. Mercer, good morning," she said. "So glad you could make it. Your team has just arrived." Emily's eyes widened. "Mr. Mercer?" Her hands froze around the tray she was holding. She felt her heartbeat quicken. No, it couldn't be. The man she had asked to leave the reserved table, the one she thought was just another customer drinking water, was the Mr. Mercer. The same Mercer whose name was on the reservation. The same man the cafe had been preparing for all morning. Her stomach dropped. For a second, she forgot how to breathe. Daniel Mercer looked up at Lisa, his expression kind and unbothered. "Thank you," he said with a small smile. "This table's fine. I didn't want to disturb your staff earlier." Lisa's eyes widened slightly, realizing what he meant. She turned to Emily, who was standing a few feet away, frozen in place like a statue. "Oh no," Lisa whispered under her breath. Emily wanted to disappear. She wished the ground would just open up and swallow her. She hadn't meant to be rude. She had no idea who he was. How could she? He wasn't dressed like a CEO, no fancy suit, no bodyguards, no attitude. Just a calm man with a tablet and a quiet smile. Lisa hurried over to Emily. Her voice was low but sharp. "Do you understand what you've done? That's Daniel Mercer. He owns Mercer Tech. He's the reason we got this catering contract." Emily's mouth went dry. I didn't know," she stammered. "He was sitting at the reserved table and—" "I don't want excuses," Lisa hissed. "Just stay quiet and hope he doesn't complain. If he tells the company what happened, we could lose the deal." Emily nodded weakly. Her eyes burned with tears she fought to hide. She felt like she had ruined everything. Her job, the cafe's chance at a big contract. Everything. But then, to everyone's surprise, Daniel turned toward them. He had clearly heard some of their whispering. Instead of looking annoyed, he smiled. "It's all right," he said calmly. "She was just doing her job." Lisa blinked, startled. "Mr. Mercer, I deeply apologize for the misunderstanding. She's new and—" "I know," Daniel said, still smiling. "That's why it's fine. She followed the rules. That's rare these days." He glanced at Emily. She could hardly look him in the eye. "Don't worry," he said gently. "You did nothing wrong." His words were simple, but they hit her deeply. No anger, no scolding, just understanding. She nodded slowly, still embarrassed but grateful. Lisa apologized again, but Daniel waved it off. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the reserved table where his executives were waiting. "Shall we begin?" he said to them, his tone calm but firm. The meeting started almost immediately. Laptops opened, documents spread across the table, and the sound of serious voices filled the air. The rest of the cafe carried on with its morning business, but for Emily, the world felt strangely quiet. She returned to her tasks, her hands moving automatically while her mind replayed what had just happened. She couldn't believe it. She had told a billionaire CEO to leave his table, and instead of getting angry, he had thanked her for doing her job. For the rest of the morning, Emily avoided looking in his direction. But a few times, when she passed by with the coffee pot, she caught him glancing up and giving her a reassuring smile. It wasn't the smile of a man who looked down on anyone. It was the smile of someone who understood, someone who had once been in her place. And though Emily didn't know it yet, that small misunderstanding, that moment she had wished never happened, would soon become the reason her name was remembered in the Willow Cafe long after the $200 million deal was signed. The cafe was filled with quiet tension. Everyone tried to act normal, but the staff couldn't stop glancing toward the large table by the window where Daniel Mercer sat with his team. It wasn't every day that someone so important came in, especially someone who could decide the future of their cafe's biggest business deal. Emily moved quickly but carefully, afraid of making even a small mistake. Her heart still raced every time she thought about what she had done. Telling that man to leave a reserved table. She wished she could rewind time and do it differently. But at the same time, his calm reaction played again and again in her head. He hadn't been angry. He hadn't shouted. Instead, he had defended her, saying she was just doing her job. Those simple words had meant more to her than he could ever imagine. Still, Lisa, the manager, was not calm. She was moving faster than ever, whispering orders to the waiters, checking on the kitchen, straightening napkins that didn't even need fixing. Her nerves were stretched thin. This was the most important meeting the cafe had hosted in years. At one point, she walked over to Emily and said in a sharp whisper, "Stay away from that table. Don't even go near it unless someone calls you. Understand?" Emily nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." Lisa sighed and rubbed her temples. "I can't believe you told him to move. If he complains, we're finished. Do you know how much this deal means?" Emily looked down. "I'm really sorry. I didn't know who he was. He looked like just a customer." Lisa interrupted. "I know. But from now on, look twice before you act. We can't afford another mistake today." Emily nodded again, feeling smaller with every word. She didn't want to make excuses. She understood Lisa's stress. The cafe's catering partnership with Mercertech could change everything. More business, better pay, stability. Lisa had worked years to earn the cafe's good name. Emily didn't want to be the reason that was ruined. She quietly moved to another section and began serving coffee to a table of office workers, trying her best to focus on her tasks. But her ears kept picking up bits of conversation from the CEO's table. Daniel Mercer's voice was calm, confident, and deep. He spoke softly, but when he talked, people listened. The men around him discussed numbers, contracts, and projections, but Daniel's tone stayed steady. He wasn't the kind of boss who dominated the room with his power. He did it with presence, quiet, thoughtful, firm. "Profit margins are fine," one of his executives said, "but we'll need to check the supplier list again before confirming." Daniel nodded. "We're not just buying a company," he replied. "We're buying its people. If they can't be trusted, the numbers don't matter." Emily didn't understand much of what they were saying, but his words caught her attention. "We're buying its people." It sounded like he cared about more than just money. That surprised her. Most rich men she had seen treated waiters like they didn't exist. But he seemed different. A few minutes later, a delivery man came in with a large box of pastries. The door swung open suddenly, and the wind knocked a few napkins off the counter. Emily rushed to pick them up just as Lisa started walking toward the kitchen to check the order. She looked stressed, her face slightly red, her jaw tight. When she returned, she whispered to another waiter, "If anything goes wrong now, I swear I'll lose it." The waiter nodded nervously. Everyone could feel the pressure. Then, out of nowhere, the door opened again. A woman in a business suit entered, one of Mercertech's assistants. She walked straight to Daniel and handed him a few papers. He thanked her with a polite smile and signed them right there on the table. Emily, passing by at that moment, saw him writing his name neatly at the bottom of the page. Daniel Mercer. Seeing that signature in real life made her heart jump again. It felt surreal. The same man she had told to leave was now signing papers that could be worth more than anything she'd ever seen in her life. When Daniel finished, he looked up and noticed Emily watching for a moment. He smiled again. That same calm, kind smile that made her feel both embarrassed and relieved at the same time. She looked away quickly, pretending to fix something on another table. Meanwhile, Lisa was whispering with another staff member near the counter. "We need to make sure everything goes perfectly. If they like the food and service today, the catering deal is ours." "What if he remembers what happened earlier?" the other waiter asked quietly. Lisa sighed. "Then we hope he's kind enough to forget it." But Daniel hadn't forgotten. He had simply chosen to forgive. And in his mind, that small event had told him something important. The young waitress had followed rules with honesty, even when she didn't know who she was dealing with. That mattered more to him than fancy manners or scripted smiles. Around halfway through the meeting, Daniel raised his hand slightly, signaling Emily. She froze. For a second, she thought she was in trouble. But he just said, "Excuse me, miss. Could I have another coffee, please?" Her voice trembled a little. "Of course, sir. Right away." As she brought the coffee to him, she placed the cup gently on the table, careful not to spill a drop. He looked up and said quietly, "Thank you, Emily." Her eyes widened. You remember my name?" He smiled. "I make a habit of remembering people who do their jobs well." Before she could respond, he turned back to his meeting, leaving her standing there speechless for a moment. Then she nodded and walked away, her cheeks warm and her heart unexpectedly light. Lisa saw the exchange from afar and panicked for a second, thinking maybe something had gone wrong. She hurried over as soon as the meeting paused. "Mr. Mercer," she began carefully, "I hope everything is to your satisfaction?" Daniel nodded. "Everything's perfect. You run a good place, Lisa. And your staff, they're doing fine. Especially that one." He motioned slightly toward Emily. Lisa blinked, unsure what to say. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." When she turned away, her shoulders finally relaxed. Emily, watching from the counter, felt a strange sense of comfort wash over her. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time since the morning began, she felt she might not have ruined everything after all. What she didn't realize was that Daniel's quiet words weren't just meant to calm the situation. They were also a test of character. He was observing not just the service, but the values behind it. And that small act of courage from a new waitress had already made an impression that no million-dollar deal could buy. The cafe had grown a little quieter now. The morning rush had passed, and most of the noise had faded into a soft hum of background chatter. Outside, the sunlight spilled through the glass windows, painting warm golden lines across the floor. Inside, the air felt lighter, though for Emily, her heart was still heavy with worry. She had been careful since the incident earlier. Every step she took, every word she spoke, she measured it twice. She didn't want to make another mistake. Not today. She had managed to stay out of trouble so far, but the thought of what she'd done still lingered in her chest like a tiny stone she couldn't get rid of. Daniel Mercer was still sitting at the big table with his executives, talking calmly as always. He looked completely at ease, as if nothing had gone wrong that morning. He even smiled sometimes, not the fake kind of smile rich people wear, but the gentle kind that makes others relax. His team, however, looked serious, focused on numbers and graphs and documents spread across the table. From behind the counter, Lisa watched everything closely. Her face showed quiet tension. The cafe's entire future might depend on this man's opinion. His words could either bring them a huge corporate contract or end the chance completely. Emily walked to the kitchen, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. She just wanted to finish her shift quietly. But as she was returning with a tray of fresh pastries, Lisa suddenly called her name. "Emily!" She stopped mid-step, her stomach tightening. Lisa's face was pale and serious. "Come here. Now." Emily walked over quickly, trying to keep her expression calm. "Yes, ma'am." Lisa leaned closer and whispered, He wants to speak to you. For a second, Emily thought she had misheard. Me? Lisa nodded. Mr. Mercer. He asked for you by name. Emily's heart dropped straight to her stomach. Her hands went cold. Why would he want to talk to her? Did she do something wrong again? Was he going to complain? Was this the moment she lost her job? Lisa noticed the panic in her eyes and said in a low voice, "Just stay calm. Be polite. Don't say anything unnecessary. And for heaven's sake, don't apologize too much." Emily nodded nervously. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the tray down. She smoothed her apron and took a deep breath. Then, slowly, she walked toward the large table. Daniel looked up as she approached. His expression was warm, kind, and calm. The same expression he had worn since morning. "Emily," he said, his tone friendly but steady. "Would you mind coming here for a moment?" She swallowed hard. "Of course, sir." When she stopped beside the table, all eyes turned toward her. His executives looked curious, perhaps even a little annoyed that their meeting was being interrupted for a waitress. But Daniel didn't care. He leaned back slightly in his chair, smiling. "You told me to leave this table earlier today," he said, his voice calm but clear enough that his whole team could hear. "Do you remember?" Emily froze. The room felt suddenly smaller. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. I'm really sorry about that. I didn't realize." He raised a hand gently, stopping her. "No need to apologize. I actually wanted to thank you." Her eyes widened. "Thank me?" "Yes." He nodded. "You followed the rules. You did what you believed was right. You didn't assume, you didn't hesitate. That's a rare quality these days." Everyone at the table looked surprised. A few of the executives glanced at each other, unsure whether to smile or stay serious. Lisa, watching from the counter, froze in disbelief. Daniel continued, "You see, I've met many people who do whatever they can to please others, especially when they think someone is important. But real professionalism isn't about knowing who you're serving. It's about doing your duty the same way for everyone. That's what integrity looks like." Emily blinked, unable to believe what she was hearing. She had spent the entire morning afraid she had offended him, but here he was, praising her. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. "I was just trying to do my job." "And you did it well," Daniel replied. "That's all that matters." He looked at Lisa then. "You've trained your staff well." She handled the situation perfectly. Calm, respectful, and firm. That's exactly the kind of person every business should want on their team. Lisa's mouth opened slightly in surprise, but she quickly regained her composure. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. We're very proud of her." Daniel smiled and turned back to Emily. "You see, Emily," he said kindly, "when I started out, I worked in a small shop. My boss used to say, 'Rules aren't there to make people unhappy. They're there to keep things fair.' You reminded me of that today." Emily felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what to say. Her eyes shimmered slightly, but she quickly blinked away the tears. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say. "That means a lot." He nodded again. "Now, if you could please bring another round of coffee for us. Black, no sugar, that would be perfect." "Of course," she said, finally allowing herself to smile. As she walked away, she felt a strange lightness in her chest. The kind that comes when a heavy worry finally disappears. Lisa gave her a small, approving nod from the counter. For the first time that day, Emily felt proud instead of scared. At the table, one of Daniel's executives leaned closer and said quietly, "That was very gracious of you, sir. Most people in your position would have complained." Daniel smiled faintly. "And that's exactly why I didn't. Leadership isn't about power. It's about understanding." The executive nodded, thoughtful. Meanwhile, Emily prepared the coffees, her hands no longer trembling. When she brought them back, she placed each cup neatly on the table. Daniel thanked her again with that calm, respectful tone that made her feel seen, not as a servant, but as a person. The cafe returned to its quiet rhythm. But for Emily, something had changed. She wasn't just a nervous new waitress anymore. She was someone who had stood her ground, made a mistake without realizing it, and earned the respect of a man whose decisions moved millions. When Daniel finally left the cafe that afternoon, he paused by the counter. Lisa and Emily both stood there, unsure if they should say something. He broke the silence first. "Thank you for the service," he said. Then he turned to Emily again. "And thank you, especially, for reminding me that honesty still exists in small places." She smiled shyly. "You're welcome, sir." As he walked out the door, Emily felt something deep inside her. A quiet, proud feeling that she couldn't describe. She didn't know that this short meeting would soon be talked about across the cafe and even among Daniel's own team. But at that moment, she only knew one thing. She had done the right thing, even when it felt wrong. And somehow that had made all the difference. The smell of fresh coffee filled the cafe as the afternoon sunlight began to fade slightly. The breakfast rush had ended, but now it was time for the lunch crowd. Businessmen, students, and a few regulars who came for their favorite sandwiches. The noise was softer now. A calm rhythm of cups clinking, chairs moving, and quiet laughter in the background. Daniel Mercer sat at the big round table near the window. Papers were spread out in front of him, contracts, charts, and a thick folder marked Mercertech expansion project. Around him sat 4 of his senior executives, all sharply dressed in suits, their laptops open and eyes fixed on him. Emily watched from behind the counter, pretending to organize sugar packets but really just trying to keep her nerves under control. After what had happened earlier, she wasn't sure how to act. Daniel had been kind to her, even praised her, but the memory of almost asking him to leave still made her heart skip every time she looked his way. The cafe's manager, Lisa, had gone from panic to perfect professionalism. She moved between tables with practiced grace, checking on every detail. She wanted everything to go smoothly, the service, the presentation, the food, because she knew how important this meeting was. If Mercertech signed the contract, their cafe would become the official caterer for one of the biggest tech companies in the city. It was a dream deal worth millions. Daniel leaned back in his chair, stirring his coffee slowly. "Let's go over the proposal one more time," he said to his team. His voice was calm and steady, the kind of tone that made people listen. His assistant, a young man named Charles, opened his laptop. "Sir, we've finalized the partnership structure. The catering service will handle daily lunches for our employees, plus event catering for conferences and corporate gatherings. The projected value is $200 million over 5 years. One of the other executives, a woman named Helen, added, "We've already reviewed 3 other vendors, but none offer the same consistency and quality as the Willow Cafe. Plus, they're local. That helps our community image." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Good. I've always believed in supporting small businesses when we can. They work harder because everything they do matters to them." He took a sip of his coffee and smiled. "And this one, especially, seems to have good people." At those words, Helen raised an eyebrow. "You mean the waitress?" Daniel chuckled quietly. "Yes, the waitress." The group exchanged small smiles, understanding what he meant. The story of the waitress who told off the CEO had already become a quiet joke among them. But Daniel's tone carried no mockery, only respect. "She didn't know who I was," he continued. "And that's exactly why I liked it. It showed honesty. No pretending, no special treatment. If their employees treat every customer that way, fairly and firmly, then they'll treat our company the same." Charles nodded. "It's rare these days, sir. Most people change their attitude the moment they realize they're dealing with someone important." "That's right," Daniel said. "And that's not what we need. We need people who do the right thing even when no one is watching." Emily, meanwhile, was serving another table nearby, pretending not to listen, but her ears caught every word. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but she couldn't help it. When she heard Daniel say that, her chest tightened. For a moment, she wanted to smile, but she kept her face straight and continued her work quietly. Lisa walked up to the table to check on them. "Is everything all right, Mr. Mercer?" "Yes, thank you, Lisa," Daniel said. "Everything's perfect. The food, the service, the atmosphere." He looked around the cafe, taking in the warm lighting, the simple wooden decor, and the quiet, friendly vibe. "It feels real." Not like those fancy places where everything looks good but feels cold. Lisa smiled politely, though her hands were trembling slightly. We're glad you think so, sir. He nodded and turned back to his team. All right, let's finalize this. For the next hour, they went over every page of the contract. Emily moved quietly between tables, refilling cups and replacing empty plates. Every time she passed their table, Daniel gave her a small nod of acknowledgement, not as a boss to a worker, but as one professional to another. It was subtle, but it made her feel respected. The executives, however, seemed restless. They exchanged glances, checking their watches, whispering numbers. The deal was big, $200 million big, and everyone wanted to be sure there were no mistakes. Finally, Charles spoke up. Sir, if we're ready, I can have the documents sent to legal for review and signatures. Daniel set down his cup. No need, he said. We've reviewed this enough times. I trust the team, and I trust this place. Helen looked surprised. So, you're approving it today? Daniel smiled faintly. Yes, today. He reached for his pen and signed the approval page at the bottom of the contract. The simple sound of the pen gliding across paper felt like a victory. Quiet, firm, and final. When he finished, he closed the folder and said, That's it. Then, the Willow Cafe is our official partner. Lisa gasped softly, covering her mouth. Oh my God. Thank you, sir. You won't regret it. Daniel stood up and extended his hand. I know I won't. You've built something special here. Keep it that way. As the executives gathered their things, Emily approached the table one last time to clear the empty cups. She didn't expect Daniel to say anything, but as she picked up a saucer, he looked up at her and said quietly, You helped me make this decision, you know? She blinked, unsure what he meant. Me, sir? Yes, he said with a small smile. Sometimes, the way a person acts tells you more than 100 reports ever could. She smiled shyly. I just tried to do my job. And you did it well, he replied. Never forget that. Then he turned and walked toward the door, his team following behind. The sunlight caught his reflection on the glass as he stepped outside, his expression calm and satisfied. Inside the cafe, Lisa and Emily exchanged a look of disbelief and joy. The deal was done. The cafe's future had just changed. All because of a simple moment of honesty that had almost looked like a mistake. Emily took a deep breath, smiling to herself. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt proud, truly proud, of being exactly who she was. The cafe was filled with a quiet hum after Daniel and his team finished their meeting. The air felt different now, lighter, almost electric, as if something big had just happened but hadn't fully sunk in yet. The waiters whispered to each other behind the counter, curious about the man who had been sitting at the corner table for so long. Emily stood near the kitchen door, holding an empty tray close to her chest. She could still see Daniel Mercer through the glass window, standing outside with his team. The sun reflected off the tall buildings behind him, giving everything a warm glow. She had no idea that inside the black folder he carried was a signed contract worth $200 million. A deal that would change not just his company's future, but also the small cafes. Lisa came rushing out from the back, her face glowing with excitement. Emily, she whispered, almost breathless. Do you know what just happened? He signed the deal. Right here. He signed it. Emily blinked. The big contract? The $200 million one. Lisa nodded rapidly, her eyes wide. Yes, that one. It's official now. We're going to be Mercerteca's official catering partner. For a few seconds, Emily just stood there, stunned. The words didn't fully register. It sounded unreal, like a story from someone else's life. That's amazing, she finally said softly. Really amazing. Lisa grabbed her hands and squeezed them. You don't understand, Emily. This changes everything. We'll be hiring more staff, expanding the menu, maybe even opening a second branch. And it all started with him sitting right there. She pointed toward the corner where Daniel had been earlier. Emily smiled shyly, though she still felt a bit unsure. I'm just glad he wasn't angry about what happened. Lisa laughed, shaking her head. Angry? He was impressed by you. He actually told me to keep you on staff. Said people like you are rare. Can you believe that? Emily's cheeks turned red. He really said that? Yes, Lisa said proudly. He said your honesty reminded him of what real integrity looks like. Emily didn't know what to say. Her heart swelled with a mix of happiness and disbelief. She had spent her whole morning worrying that she would lose her job, and now she was being praised by a man whose company had just made a deal worth more than she could ever imagine. Meanwhile, outside the cafe, Daniel stood near his car, speaking with his assistant Charles. The wind ruffled his hair slightly, and a small smile stayed on his face. Sir, Charles said, holding a tablet, the legal team just confirmed the contract is finalized. The board will be very pleased. Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the cafe window. Through the glass, he could see Emily clearing tables, focused and calm as ever. She's the reason I decided today, Daniel said quietly. Charles frowned slightly. The waitress. Daniel smiled faintly. Yes, the waitress. He slipped his hands into his pockets. You know, Charles, in business, you can read thousands of reports, study numbers, and listen to fancy presentations. But sometimes, one small human moment tells you more than all of that. Charles tilted his head. What do you mean, sir? Daniel looked thoughtful. When she asked me to leave, she didn't care who I was. She only cared about doing the right thing. That kind of honesty is rare, and it reminded me of why I started this company in the first place. Not for power, not for money, but for people who work hard and mean what they say. Charles nodded slowly, realizing the depth behind Daniel's words. That's powerful, sir. Daniel smiled. No, Charles. That's real life. He turned back toward the cafe, almost as if he wanted to step inside one last time. After a moment's thought, he did. The bell above the door rang softly as he entered. Everyone looked up. Conversations paused. Emily froze mid-step, her heart skipping. She hadn't expected him to return. Daniel walked straight to the counter where Lisa stood. He gave her a warm smile. I wanted to say thank you for the service and for the atmosphere. It's been a long time since I felt so comfortable in a meeting. Lisa smiled politely. We're honored, sir. Truly honored. Then Daniel turned to Emily. She stood still, her tray pressed against her side, unsure if she should speak first. He broke the silence. Emily, right? She nodded quickly. Yes, sir. He smiled. I just wanted to tell you something. You probably don't realize it, but what you did today reminded me that the smallest actions can have the biggest meaning. You thought you were just doing your job, but sometimes doing your job honestly can change everything. Emily felt her throat tighten. She didn't know how to respond. I didn't mean to cause trouble, she said softly. You didn't, Daniel said. You helped me make a decision. I signed the deal because I realized that any company that hires people like you deserves the chance to grow. For a moment, the cafe was completely silent. Even the other customers seemed to sense the importance of the moment. Daniel reached into his pocket and placed a sleek, silver business card on the counter. If you ever want to work for Mercer Tech, he said with a kind smile, call me. People like you belong in leadership. Emily stared at the card, speechless. Lisa's eyes widened in awe. Then Daniel tipped his head slightly and added, keep doing what's right, Emily. It'll take you farther than you can imagine. And with that, he turned and left. The door closed behind him, and the sound of the little bell echoed softly through the cafe. Emily stood there, holding the card, her hands shaking slightly. She wasn't sure what to feel. Joy, disbelief, pride, or all of it at once. Lisa whispered, Emily, do you realize what just happened? He offered you a job with Mercer Tech. Emily looked down at the card again, the name Daniel Mercer, CEO printed in silver letters. She smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her eyes. I didn't even do anything special, she said softly. Lisa shook her head. You were honest, Emily. That is special. Outside, Daniel got into his car, still smiling. As the driver pulled away, he glanced back at the cafe one last time. It wasn't a fancy place. It wasn't perfect. But it was real, just like the people inside it. He leaned back in his seat, feeling strangely inspired. Sometimes, he murmured to himself, the biggest deals begin with the smallest moments. And just like that, the cafe returned to its usual rhythm. Cups clinking, doors opening, customers chatting. But for everyone inside, something had changed. For Emily, especially, it was a day she would never forget. The next few weeks at the Willow Cafe felt different. There was a new kind of energy in the air, the kind that comes after something amazing has happened. The cafe was busier than ever, filled with people who had heard about the new partnership with Mercer Tech. Reporters sometimes stopped by to take photos, and local newspapers wrote about how a small cafe had signed a deal with one of the biggest companies in the city. Emily still came to work every morning, tying her apron neatly, checking the tables, and greeting customers with her usual smile. But deep inside, she knew her life wasn't quite the same anymore. People looked at her differently now. Some whispered that she was the reason behind the deal. Others said she was the lucky waitress. But Emily didn't think of it that way. She still believed she had just done her job. One morning, as she was wiping down a table near the window, Lisa came up to her with a big grin. "You'll never believe this," she said excitedly. "Mercer Tech just placed their first big order. 300 boxed lunches for their staff meeting next week." Emily smiled, her heart lifting. "That's wonderful, Lisa." Lisa nodded proudly. "It is. And guess what? Mr. Mercer himself requested that you be part of the delivery team. He asked for you by name." Emily's eyes widened. "Me? But why me?" Lisa chuckled. "Maybe because he hasn't forgotten what you did. Or maybe he just knows he can trust you. Either way, you're going." The day of the delivery came quickly. Emily dressed neatly in the cafe's uniform, but this time she added a small pin her mother had given her. A tiny silver heart. It was her good luck charm. She rode in the delivery van with 2 other coworkers, her heart beating fast as the tall Mercer Tech building came into view. It was huge, all glass and steel shining under the sun. Inside, everything felt modern and elegant. Employees walked briskly through the halls, holding tablets and coffee cups. Emily felt a little out of place, but she carried the food boxes carefully, determined not to let her nerves show. They were led to a large conference room where Daniel Mercer and his team were waiting. The moment she entered, Daniel looked up and smiled warmly. "Emily," he said, standing to greet her. "I'm glad you came." She smiled shyly. "Good afternoon, sir. We brought your order. Everything's labeled and fresh." He nodded approvingly. "Thank you. You've done a great job." After she helped set up the food, Daniel turned to his team and said, "Everyone, this is Emily, the waitress I told you about." A few people smiled and nodded politely, but Daniel continued. "She reminded me what honesty and professionalism really mean. She didn't know who I was when we met, but her attitude told me everything I needed to know about this cafe, and that's why I chose them." Emily felt her face grow warm, but she couldn't stop smiling. Hearing those words made her feel proud in a way she couldn't explain. It wasn't just about the compliment, it was about being seen, being appreciated for doing something right, even when it seemed like a mistake. Daniel turned back to her and said quietly, "I hope you're still considering my offer." She looked puzzled for a second, then remembered the silver business card he had given her weeks ago. She had kept it safely in her wallet, though she hadn't told anyone about it. "I wasn't sure if you meant it," she admitted softly. He chuckled. "I always mean what I say. If you ever want to learn more about leadership, communication, or business, call me. There's always room for people like you in my company." Emily didn't know what to say. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." He nodded. "Think about it. And whether you work here or stay where you are, keep that same honesty. It'll take you far." Later that day, after the delivery was done, Emily walked out of the Mercer Tech building feeling like she was floating. The city looked different, brighter, bigger, more full of possibility. She couldn't stop smiling the whole ride back. When she reached the cafe, Lisa was waiting by the door, eager to hear every detail. How was it? Did you see him? Was he nice? Emily laughed softly. Yes, he was very kind. He even told his whole team about what happened that day. Lisa's eyes shone. You must be so proud. I am, Emily said quietly. But you know what I've realized, Lisa? Sometimes one small choice can change everything. That day, when I told him to leave, I was just trying to do what was right. I didn't know it would lead to all this. Lisa nodded, her expression softening. That's how life works sometimes. The right thing doesn't always look easy in the moment, but it always matters. In the following months, the cafe grew busier than ever. Mercertech employees came by often, and soon other companies started reaching out too. The cafe's name became known across the city, not just for its food, but for its story. People called it the Cafe of Integrity. Emily was promoted to supervisor, just as Daniel had predicted. She trained new staff members, teaching them not just how to take orders or serve coffee, but how to respect every customer equally. Rules aren't about power, she often told them with a smile. They're about fairness. Sometimes, when she had a quiet moment, she would look at the silver business card Daniel had given her. It was still in her wallet, untouched but precious. She didn't call him, not yet. She wanted to learn as much as she could first. But she knew deep down that the offer would always be there. One rainy evening, as she closed up the cafe, she stood by the window watching the raindrops slide down the glass. The reflection of the city lights shimmered softly, and she thought about how much her life had changed. She wasn't the nervous, uncertain waitress she had been on her third day. She was confident now, calm, sure of herself, proud of her journey. She smiled quietly and whispered to herself, doing the right thing is never a mistake. And somewhere in a tall glass building across the city, Daniel Mercer sat in his office, looking out at the same rain. When his assistant asked what he was thinking about, he simply smiled and said, about a cafe, and a waitress who reminded me why integrity still matters. The world outside kept moving, but for both of them, that simple encounter had become a lasting reminder. That honesty, kindness, and doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, can change everything. And that's how one small act in a small cafe led to a story that inspired hundreds. Not because it was about a deal worth millions, but because it was about something even more valuable, character.